here.
The air in Mississippi is heavy. It doesn't just hold the humidity, it holds the screams of the dead. 15 secrets buried in the Delta mud. 15 shadows lingering on the Gulf Coast. If you feel the chill, don't look back. You've entered our definitive list. The top 15 haunted places in Mississippi. 1. McRaven House, Vicksburg. The air around McRaven House in Vicksburg holds a perpetual humidity, thick not just with Mississippi heat but with trauma. It is an architectural palimpsest, its 3 distinct building styles mirroring the layers of grief trapped within its walls. Visitors often feel a profound, inexplicable chill emanating from the original 1797 Frontier Cottage section, a space that seems to defy the natural order of time. This historic home is a nexus of documented suffering, a structure that never fully surrendered its inhabitants to the grave. The house's tragic prominence began in 1863, when the horrors of the Vicksburg siege spilled directly onto its grounds, serving as a Confederate makeshift hospital. McRaven became a bottleneck for wounded soldiers, feverish nurses, and overwhelming grief. One of the most documented historical deaths is that of Maria's, the wife of the final owner, who was reportedly killed on the front porch by a stray Union bullet. Pregnant at the time, her sudden, violent and consecrated the ground as a place of ceaseless unrest, ensuring that the house would remain tethered to the worst days of the Civil War. Maria is perhaps the most active presence, manifesting as a woman in 19th century dress, observed pacing the porch where she fell or standing forlornly in the Victorian parlor. However, the house holds more than one victim. Investigators consistently report the frantic energy of a nurse, believed to be a caregiver, who later died within the walls from childbirth fever or complications. She is linked to the strong, spectral scent of lavender and the chilling sounds of small children crying from empty upstairs bedrooms, a phantom ward reliving its final agonies. Objects are frequently rearranged or launched across the floors of the older sections, and the grand staircase is known for capturing disembodied, agonizing moans of soldiers being carried to their final rest. McRaven is not merely haunted, it is actively reliving its history. Every floorboard creak is a footstep from a century past, and the faint, cold touch on the back of your neck is the enduring claim of Vicksburg's most tragically wounded house, a claim that never permits its dead or its living guests to find true peace. 2. King's Tavern, Natchez. The humid Natchez air clings to the skin like a shroud, particularly around the aged brick and weathered shutters of King's Tavern, reportedly the oldest standing structure in Mississippi. Since its establishment in the 1700s, this historic landmark has accrued more than just dusty accolades. It has absorbed the desperate sorrow of souls too fractured to move on. Patrons often describe an oppressive stillness within its cramped rooms, a coldness that defies the summer heat and seems to emanate from the very mortar. Local lore suggests the property was once home to a grisly murder. During the Natchez Trace's lawless prime, a young woman, often identified simply as Madeleine, was killed within the tavern walls, likely dismembered, her remains hidden in the deepy, bricked-up walls of the fireplace chimney. This gruesome act cemented her spirit to the location, transforming a place of temporary respite into her eternal prison. For centuries, Madeleine has been the tavern's most consistent and most territorial resident. The specific manifestations of her presence are both subtle and unnerving. Bartenders frequently report bottles flying off shelves when no one is near, or hearing faint, rhythmic tapping sounds emanating from the kitchen fireplace, a sound too deliberate to be the settling of the old building. More disturbingly, staff and late-night cleaners have described encountering a faint, disoriented female apparition, usually seen weeping near the front bar before vanishing into the shadows of the stairway. The scent of cheap, faded perfume sometimes permeates the second floor, quickly followed by the distinct sound of a woman sighing directly into a living person's ear. Recently, during a renovation, workers encountered something solid and inexplicable embedded deep within the plaster of an old chimney cavity. Though the discovery was dismissed by ownership as mere animal bones, the construction crew quit the following day, citing unbearable pressure and the distinct feeling of being watched by something acutely malevolent. Madeline remains, inextricably fused with the structure, forever waiting behind the brick and demanding recognition from the terrified mortals who dare occupy her space. Stuckey's Bridge, Lauderdale County. The air hanging over the Black Creek bottom, where the old wooden span of Stuckey's Bridge crosses into Lauderdale County, carries a distinct, heavy chill. Even in high August, locals avoid this stretch after sundown, attributing the perpetual gloom not merely to the dense canopy, but to the unresolved trauma saturating the riverbank. This crossing, long before the concrete supports replaced the rickety timber, was a notorious bottleneck for trouble, culminating in the grim legend that now defines the location. The widely circulated history recounts the tragedy of the Stuckey family's eldest daughter, Elizabeth, who vanished near the bridge in the early 1930s. Though presumed abducted or drowned, her disappearance was quickly followed by an unsettling pattern of unexplained livestock deaths and a pervasive, sickly sweet scent that clung to the water. The consensus solidified when a railroad worker claimed to see Elizabeth's spectral form, dressed in the tattered blue gingham she wore on the day she vanished, kneeling mid-span, her arms dangling toward the swirling current below. The haunting manifestations at Stuckey's Bridge are remarkably specific. Drivers who cross late at night often report a sudden, jarring reduction in speed, feeling as if an unseen weight has been pressed onto the chassis. Some have seen the brief, pale flash of a girl's face reflected in the rearview mirror, always weeping silently. Furthermore, the bridge railing itself sometimes generates an unnatural resonance, a faint, high-pitched scratching sound, audible only when the wind is completely still, interpreted by those familiar with the history as the futile effort of desperate fingernails seeking purchase on the slick, damp wood of the original structure. The ghost of Elizabeth Stuckey does not seek vengeance, but companionship. Anyone stopping their vehicle on the bridge after midnight risks hearing a soft, insistent tapping against the passenger window. If one turns their head to look, they will see only the darkness and the reflective white posts of the railing. But the cold, wet impression of a small handprint will remain permanently etched on the glass, a residue that cannot be wiped away, a silent demand to be let into the warmth and taken finally home. For Natchez City Cemetery, Natchez. The iron gates of Natchez City Cemetery, cloaked in Spanish moss and a perpetual, humid twilight, always felt less like an entrance and more like a threshold to a submerged world. The air here hung heavy with the scent of aged cedar and river silt, muffling the sounds of the Mississippi far below. Established in 1822, this sprawling necropolis holds generations of the city's dead, their elaborate marble monuments leaning at precarious angles, eroded by the relentless river weather. But it is the history of the section dedicated to the poor and indigent, the forgotten souls buried in unmarked earth, that truly darkens the atmosphere. Local legend whispers most frequently of the turning grays, a collective of spirits said to emerge during the deep fog that rolls up from the water, particularly near the original, collapsed portion of the Pauper's Field. They are not malevolent, merely endless, ceaseless wanderers, seeking a marker, a name, any anchor in the indifferent world they left behind. But one specific haunting chills the blood of anyone who stays past sundown. The woman in gray. She is said to manifest near the old, shattered obelisk, clutching a bouquet of withered yellowed roses. She is rarely seen, but often felt. Visitors report an unbearable drop in temperature, even in the height of summer, followed by a profound, suffocating sorrow. Her true terror lies not in aggression, but in her silence and her despair. Those who encounter her report waking days later with the inexplicable, crushing weight of someone else's grief, settling upon their chest a sorrow so complete it feels stolen. Security patrols, who rarely venture into the deeper sections after midnight, sometimes find fresh, yellowed petals scattered on the dew-soaked grass, though no yellow flowers grow in that section of the grounds. The cemetery is officially closed from dusk till dawn, a rule strictly enforced, less for the protection of the monuments and more for the sanity of the living. To linger is to risk having that abyssal sadness attach itself to you permanently. A phantom passenger carried home. When the gates clang shut, the moss sways, and the river fog inevitably begins its silent climb. The restless poor of Natchez City Cemetery begin their long, lonely watch. The Old Capitol Museum, Jackson. The air inside the Old Capitol Museum in Jackson, Mississippi, never truly circulates. It hangs thick and cool, smelling of aged oak and forgotten legislative dust. Even on the brightest afternoon, the Senate chamber, with its tiered seating and heavy velvet drapes, remains steeped in a profound twilight. It is here, under the soaring dome that once witnessed secession debates and Reconstruction struggles, that the sense of watchful melancholy is strongest. The building itself is a palimpsest of ambition, failure, and violence, a history often whispered to docents after the last tourist has left. The museum's darkest legend concerns Governor Charles Clark, a figure who presided during the catastrophic final years of the Civil War. Clark, already frail, was gravely injured in a carriage accident while attempting to flee Vicksburg, and subsequently confined to the executive offices. The legend insists that he died not in his home, but within the Capitol, a death allegedly hastened by the psychological strain of defeat and the imminent collapse of the state government he desperately tried to hold together. His failure, the story goes, anchored his tormented spirit to the marble halls he could never truly save. Staff members frequently report specific, chilling phenomena emanating from the second-floor executive suites. Doors, secured and locked by key, are found ajar at dawn. The heavy brass handles cold to the touch. The distinct smell of cigar smoke, a robust Victorian blend no longer available, sometimes permeates the governor's study, only to vanish moments later. Most unnerving are the auditory disturbances, the muffled, rapid scratching of a quill pen on parchment, followed by a sudden, frustrated slam of a heavy book, often heard late at night when the building is entirely empty save for the security patrol. On one occasion, a night guard investigating the noise saw a shadow, not a silhouette, but a distortion of the available light slumped over the desk in the study. As the guard approached, the air temperature plummeted, and a voice, dry as old paper, whispered, "The treasury is empty." The shadow dissolved instantly. To walk those silent halls is to feel the oppressive weight of a lost cause. Eternally debated, forever unresolved, trapped within the walls of a state house that refuses to let its troubled past rest. Six, Waverly Mansion, West Point. The stone facade of Waverly Mansion, perched precariously above a steep bend of the Hudson River near West Point, seems to perpetually weep the cold humidity of the Highlands. Built in 1840 for Colonel Elias Thorne, a mathematics professor at the academy, the house was intended as a sanctuary, but it soon became a tomb for hope. Visitors often comment on the oppressive silence that blankets the sprawling estate, a quiet thick enough to muffle even the sound of the trains rumbling far below, replacing ambient noise with an unsettling pressure. The tragedy that sealed the mansion's fate occurred just 5 years after its completion. Colonel Thorne was killed not in a grand battle, but in a minor logistical accident during a training exercise upstate. His wife, Clara Thorne, was reportedly inconsolable. She refused to leave the mansion, obsessively watching the river for weeks, convinced her husband's body would somehow float back to her. After 3 months of isolated grief, Clara was discovered in the library, having taken her own life. Local legend maintains that the mansion absorbed her unending waiting and her profound despair, anchoring her consciousness to the cold estate. The subsequent owners, mostly military families and wealthy financiers, reported inexplicable phenomena centered around the master bedroom and the south-facing drawing room. The most persistent report is the profound, unmoving chill, a localized drop in temperature often accompanied by the distinct, wet sound of slow, heavy weeping emanating from empty corridors. Security footage reviewed in 2008 by a paranormal investigation team supposedly captured a faint, translucent figure standing at the tall drawing room window, perpetually gazing toward the military academy grounds, wearing the flowing white dress Clara was buried in. Waverly Mansion is not haunted by an aggressive entity, but by a presence frozen in the agonizing moment before acceptance. Those who lingered too long by the south window claim they hear a faint, almost inaudible whisper, not a plea or a warning, but simply the repeated query delivered in a tone of agonizing anticipation. Is the fog lifting yet? Can you see him coming home? The answer, eternally, is no. Cebu, Merrehope, Meridian. The air inside Merrehope is thick, carrying the scent of dust and fading jasmine. This sprawling antebellum mansion in Meridian, Mississippi, stands as a testament not just to Southern resilience, but to enduring sorrow. Visitors often report a profound, unshakable sense of observation as they tour the lavish rooms, a chill that has nothing to do with the failing air conditioning. The house, meticulously preserved, holds its history close, especially the darker chapters etched into its original framework, compelling modern residents to acknowledge the permanence of its restless past. Though it survived Sherman's march largely intact, Merrehope did not escape personal tragedy. Legend centers on Martha, the daughter of an early owner who succumbed to yellow fever in the winter of 1878. Her final days spent in the suffocating heat of the upstairs master bedroom. She never made it downstairs for her planned engagement party, her elaborate dress remaining in its trunk. The pervasive story dictates that her mourning was too profound to allow her spirit rest, tethering her permanently to the site of her lost future and the life she was never afforded. The manifestations are subtle, yet pervasive. Museum staff frequently log incidents involving the second-floor landing, footsteps echoing when the floor is empty, and a distinct, sharp drop in temperature near the linen closet. Regardless of the outdoor heat, investigators focusing on the structure's deep history have captured electronic voice phenomena, whispers demanding immediate silence, and detected the unmistakable scent of old lilac perfume near the four-poster bed where Martha died. Occasionally, the reflection of a pale woman in a high-collared, gray dress is glimpsed in the house's ornate antique mirrors, only to vanish the moment one turns to confront the source. Merrehope remains open to the public, a beautiful facade housing a cold and ceaseless permanence. But those who stay after the velvet ropes are drawn report the most unsettling phenomenon: the faint, repetitive sound of a delicate music box winding down, played for a ghost bride who waits eternally for a celebration that will never begin. Trapped within the silent elegance of her ancestral home, Windsor Ruins, Port Gibson. The air around the Windsor Ruins in Port Gibson, Mississippi, is not still. It hums with a deep historical sorrow. 23 colossal Corinthian columns pierce the humid canopy, monuments to an opulence that vanished in fire. They are the skeletal remains of a 4-story antebellum mansion, once the grandest home on the Mississippi River, now reduced to an unforgettable architectural graveyard that feels less like a ruin and more like a waiting cage. Construction was completed in 1861, and the house miraculously survived the heavy campaigning of the Civil War, even serving briefly as a Union observation post. Its downfall was far more mundane yet tragically final. A carelessly discarded cigar in 1890 sparked a blaze that consumed the structure in hours. Local legends claim that the ruin is tethered not just to the structural loss, but to the spectral anxiety of Major General Stephen Duncan, the original owner's son-in-law, who allegedly wanders the perimeter, searching for salvaged documents and portraits that were never recovered from the inferno. Modern visitors often report inexplicable cold spots centered between the third and fourth remaining columns, regardless of the scorching Mississippi heat. More disturbing are the photographic anomalies. Tourists who photograph the site at twilight frequently capture shadowy figures standing atop the empty column capitals tall, indistinct forms that evaporate the moment the camera is lowered. Paranormal investigators have also recorded faint, rhythmic scratching noises emanating from the empty foundation pits, sounding like frantic attempts to dig through the scorched earth. Perhaps a reflection of the panicked servants trying to save the estate's treasures. The site functions as an eternal echo chamber for a life abruptly ended. The spirits here are not overtly hostile. They are simply trapped within the architecture of their disaster, condemned to repeat the trauma. When the sun sets and the pillars turn black against the sky, the ruins stop being a historical landmark and become, once again, the burning house, forever waiting for the careless spark to be undone, and forever failing to extinguish the memory of the loss. Magnolia City Cemetery, Kosciusko. The Kosciusko City Cemetery is less a resting place and more a thick, humid repository of unsettled grief, situated near the historic center. Its wrought iron fences attempt to contain an energy that has long spilled into the bordering streets. Visitors consistently report an oppressive stillness, especially near the older, crumbling mausoleums dedicated to the town's founding families. These are the graves that the local archives rarely mention, the plots where the documented history gives way to fearful whispers and cautionary tales reserved for the dead hours of midnight. The primary entity of concern is known only as the Watcher, a residual presence said to be linked to the tragic 1891 fire that claimed several prominent local figures and left others bankrupt and institutionalized. Witnesses describe a tall, gaunt figure, often mistaken for a groundskeeper, who paces the perimeter of the south block, identified by the faint smell of burning coal even on the clearest nights. This figure is never seen looking forward. Its head is perpetually bowed, suggesting unbearable remorse. However, it is its auditory manifestation, a low, rhythmic sobbing that originates from within the deepest crypts, that registers the most intense distress among investigators. Recorded incidents detail dramatic shifts in ambient temperature, often plummeting 10 to 15 degrees within the boundaries of the main colonial-era crypts. These cold spots are frequently accompanied by the sound of keys rattling a chilling, metallic scraping that seems to hover just above the gravestones. More alarming are the instances of interaction. Visitors standing near the broken statues often feel an insistent, icy tug on their clothing, a pull demanding they turn around. Those who comply report seeing nothing, but the subsequent sensation of being breathed upon a breath smelling faintly of mildewed velvet and dust is often enough to prompt an immediate and panicked retreat. The city cemetery of Kosciusko does not harbor playful spirits or easily dismissed apparitions. It holds a tangible, suffocating sadness that clings to the skin and suffocates the air. It serves as a persistent reminder that some histories refuse to stay buried. And the cost of silence in the late 19th century is a century-long sentence of eternal, desolate pacing among the moss-covered stones. The Watcher is still waiting for someone, perhaps everyone, to finally notice the truth beneath the ground. Keaton, Chapel of the Cross Cemetery, Madison. The shadows lengthen early at Chapel of the Cross Cemetery, where the low, gray stones seem to absorb all ambient light, trapping it beneath the earth. A persistent, damp chill hangs in the air. Regardless of the season, a spectral mist rising from the clay soil. This old Madison graveyard holds secrets deeper than its oldest graves, rooted in the sorrow and swift justice that followed the Civil War. A history etched into the weathered marble and the eerie silence of the overgrown plots. Legend tells of a small contingent of Union soldiers interred here after a local skirmish, whose commitment to their posts transcends death. They are not benign spirits. They are watchmen bound by duty and fury. The most prominent haunting concerns Lieutenant Elias Vance, buried near the cemetery's central oak. Vance was known for his stringent discipline and quick temper, traits that have survived his mortal coil. Visitors report hearing the distinct, heavy thud of marching boots on the gravel paths when no living person is present, always stopping abruptly near the southern fence line. But the real terror begins after midnight. Individuals who have lingered after the iron gates are locked report experiencing extreme disorientation, feeling phantom hands pushing them toward the graves, and hearing sharp, whispered commands to fall in. The most alarming encounters involve sudden, piercing flashes of white light, followed immediately by the suffocating smell of gunpowder and sulfur. This manifestation is believed to be Vance's final, lethal reprimand. The cemetery's oppressive atmosphere peaks during the late fall, on nights when the fog rolls in thick from the surrounding fields. Those walking along the perimeter road have seen the spectral outline of a tall, imposing figure in a tattered Union coat pacing the rows. Do not meet his gaze. If you do, the silence will shatter, replaced by the terrifying, ragged scream of a man eternally furious, demanding your immediate surrender to the damp, welcoming soil. 11. Franklin Cemetery, Gautier. The air over Franklin Cemetery in Gautier, Mississippi, rarely moves, held captive by the heavy humidity and the massive, ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss. Even during the day, the light filters through the canopy with a peculiar, bruised quality, lending the oldest section near the bayou a perpetual gloom. This quiet dignity conceals a long history of sudden, violent ends, typical of coastal regions ravaged by hurricanes and disease. It is here, amongst the eroded marble and sandstone, that the legend of the Watcher resides, tied to the graves of those who met untimely, chaotic demises. Local oral traditions trace the primary unrest to the 1920s, a period marked by several unexplained fires in the adjacent properties surrounding the cemetery. The community focused its suspicion on Silas Albright, the long-term caretaker, known for his erratic temper and fierce, almost zealous devotion to the burial ground. Though Albright died of sudden pneumonia shortly after the last incident, a death officially ruled natural. The speed and secrecy of his interment suggested an eagerness to dismiss the source of the community's mounting fear. Legend posits that Silas was not merely devoted to the dead, but was frantically trying to conceal a specific, unnamed injustice interred in the oldest, unmarked ground. He was denied the full rights of the rest he had protected. Those who frequent the cemetery after sunset, usually researchers or local historians attempting archival work, report consistent electronic interference focused solely on the central pre-Civil War section. Batteries drain instantly, and security cameras malfunction, seizing up whenever aimed at a specific cluster of weathered headstones near the southern fence line. More unsettling are the sensory details. Visitors often describe a distinct, heavy scent of burnt kerosene and smoldering oak wood. Even decades after the fires that defined Silas's legend, this odor is often accompanied by localized drops in temperature, sometimes registering nearly 20 degrees below the ambient coastal air. Witnesses also report the unmistakable, methodical sound of a heavy, metal object being dragged across loose gravel, the rhythm of a shovel scraping against soil, suggesting eternal labor. It is the sound of endless, desperate duty, suggesting that Silas Albright, the blamed caretaker, did not achieve rest. He merely traded his mortal body for an endless shift, patrolling the cemetery he was accused of destroying, still fulfilling his grim function by guarding secrets that remain buried beneath the relentless moss and the silent, impenetrable earth. Rowan Oak, Oxford. Rowan Oak stands shrouded, a monument to decay and genius, the air around it thick with the humidity of the Mississippi Delta and the heavy silence of unwritten words. The antebellum property, shaded by ancient, twisted oaks draped in Spanish moss, seems less a house and more a museum of memory, holding the echoes of its most famous resident, William Faulkner. The sense of isolation is profound. Even in the late afternoon, the deep shadows under the massive canopy feel less like cooling shade and more like active concealment. Faulkner lived and worked here for 4 decades, meticulously planning his complex narratives directly onto the walls of his study, where the indelible ink of his outlines remains visible today. But the creativity was often fueled by anguish and spirits, leaving behind an intensely charged psychic residue. Local folklore suggests the house is haunted not by a traditional victim, but by the physical embodiment of Faulkner's own creative torment, a figure perpetually pacing. Trapped between the liquor bottle and the demanding typewriter, he died in 1962. But the energy of his self-destructive genius never departed the grounds. Curators and visitors frequently report documented anomalies, concentrated particularly around the study and the heavy mahogany staircase. The sound of a heavy, halting gait is sometimes heard upstairs when the house is officially empty, accompanied by sudden drops in temperature near the bedroom where Faulkner passed. The most disturbing recurring phenomenon is the sharp, acrid smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey that manifests abruptly in locked rooms, quickly dissipating before its source can be confirmed. However, it is the brief, shadowy flicker seen near the stairwell tall, gaunt, and moving with desperate haste that chills the soul. It is the restless shade of the writer himself, eternally seeking the elusive final word or the next drink, forever trapped in the cycle of his brilliant, broken existence, pacing the periphery of eternity at Rowan Oak. Amos Deason House, Ellisville. The Amos Deason House, settled deep in Ellisville, Mississippi, doesn't just hold history, it traps it. Built of aged cypress in 1845, the structure breathes a thick, heavy silence. Even the Mississippi humidity cannot penetrate the core coldness that emanates from the foundations, leaving visitors with an immediate, suffocating pressure. This dread is a clear sign that the ground beneath the floorboards is not merely soil, but a burial shroud, perpetually disturbed by the violence that occurred here over a century and a half ago. The house became infamous during the Civil War. In 1864, it served as a temporary provost marshal's headquarters, a designation that brought immediate catastrophe. 13 alleged Union deserters were brought to the property, condemned not just to death, but to a brutal spectacle. The great oak dominating the front lawn became their gallows. They were hanged until they ceased to twitch, their final moments etched violently into the surrounding air and absorbed into the very structure of the home. The Deason House has never known true peace since that day. Investigators document chilling consistency across the property. The attic, where the soldiers were sometimes held before execution, registers unnatural dips in temperature, defying the heat of the summer months. Apparitions, vague and fleeting, appear as shadow men shuffling through the doorways. Most disturbing are the auditory phenomena. Faint, guttural groans that echo the sound of choking, often accompanied by the subtle, rhythmic creaking of ropes tightening against wood. Objects frequently vanish or move in the dark, usually heavy furniture or small personal items. The Deason House functions as a stage where the curtain never drops on the final. tragic act. The 13 men who died violently here are not benign residents. They are victims perpetually reliving their last breath, their residual pain manifesting year after year. When the wind howls around the old oak, locals know it is not just the weather, but the collective, dying gasp of 13 souls forever entangled in the cypress wood, still waiting for the final, merciful fall. 14. Sycamore Church Cemetery, Picayune. The air over Sycamore Church Cemetery hangs thick and wet, a stagnant shroud over the cracked marble monuments. Located deep within the humid outskirts of Picayune, the site predates most verifiable local records, its earliest graves marked only by river stones swallowed by invasive vines. The silence here is unnerving, not the quiet of reverence, but of something listening, something that has claimed the land for generations beneath the towering, skeletal sycamore canopy. This isolated locale seems inherently hostile to the living. Local documentation suggests the original wooden church burned down in the 1920s, but the cemetery remained active, tended by a solitary, fiercely loyal figure named Abel Thorne. Thorne was intensely protective of the resting place, frequently clashing with developers attempting to drain and clear the surrounding wetland for commercial logging. Legend holds that when Thorne died mysteriously, found submerged in the nearby creek, he was buried hastily in an unmarked plot near the crumbling perimeter fence. His protective spirit, it is believed, refused to relinquish its vigil over the ground he had sworn to defend. The manifestations attributed to Thorne are highly localized and aggressive. Visitors frequently report a pervasive sensation of being watched, accompanied by the distinct, heavy sound of shuffling footsteps echoing on the gravel drive, though no visible person accounts for the sound. More disturbing are the physical accounts. Drivers who park near the cemetery often return to find inexplicable, muddy handprints smeared across their windshields and trunks. These prints are consistently described as being unnaturally large and elongated, suggesting a massive, desperate figure attempting to physically push the vehicle away from the sacred, unstable ground. Investigators using thermal imaging near Thorne's alleged burial location have routinely noted severe, localized cold spots that defy the suffocating Mississippi heat, sometimes dropping temperatures by 15 degrees in a concentrated 3-foot radius. The old caretaker remains, a territorial and furious guardian whose eternal, silent claim over Sycamore Church Cemetery means no living soul is truly welcome to linger after the sun has set. Steed, Vicksburg National Military Park, Vicksburg. The air at Vicksburg is heavy, not just with Mississippi humidity, but with the residue of relentless artillery. The vast fields and deep ravines of the National Military Park are silent monuments to the 1863 campaign. Yet observers often report a profound auditory deception. Even on the calmest day, the ground seems to absorb and distort sound, creating a persistent, muffled pressure against the eardrums. It is the quiet that comes after 47 days of nonstop bombardment, a silence that is actively waiting to break. The siege of Vicksburg saw thousands perish, not just from mini balls and cannon shot, but from disease, starvation, and the sheer desperation of cave-dwelling existence within the bluffs. This concentrated suffering left a deep, psychic footprint across the park, making the historical sorrow feel immediate. Numerous reports focus specifically on the areas near the Shirley House, the lone surviving wartime structure, and the steep slope near the 3rd Louisiana Redan, where some of the bloodiest hand-to-hand fighting occurred as the Confederate defenses collapsed. Park rangers and late-night security patrols consistently document instances of disembodied shouting and spectral commands echoing from the vacant trenches, often in obsolete military cadence. Most unsettling are the phantom smells, burnt powder, and the acrid, metallic scent of fresh blood, particularly after sunset near the Confederate lines where the trenches are deepest. Visitors traversing the narrow trails have reported brief, clear sightings of uniformed figures pale, gaunt soldiers frozen mid-march, who vanish upon direct acknowledgement. Furthermore, equipment malfunctions are common near the market graves, and infrared cameras frequently register unexplained, intense thermal signatures in visibly empty areas. Vicksburg is not haunted by playful spirits. It is cursed by profound exhaustion. The soldiers who died here did not pass peacefully. They starved and suffered under the relentless Mississippi sun and the threat of starvation. Their commitment to their desperate duty is the horror that remains, binding them to the red clay. They are not waiting for rest, merely awaiting the next impossible command, forever patrolling the silent, sun-baked earth they eventually lost. That wraps up our countdown of Mississippi's top 15 haunted places. From Natchez to the Delta, these restless spirits certainly keep the Magnolia State spooky. If you know a haunted spot we missed, or want to share your own ghostly encounter, tell us in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the paranormal. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.